You're on your own. They sacrificed me for my brother. 4 months later, my payback had them pleading. Just one conversation. The words still haunt me, a cold, sharp echo in my mind. If one of you has to go, it's better you than him. My own father delivering my sentence with chilling pragmatism. My mother stood by, her silence a deafening agreement. He's always been our priority. You're on your own. This, after they'd bled their savings dry for my brother Nelson, when his latest disaster landed him in jail. But when I needed money for a crucial surgery, that was their heartless refrain. I'd simply nodded. Thanks for showing me where I stand. 4 months. That's all it took to plan the move that would leave them with absolutely nothing. Now, their calls are relentless. Please, just one conversation. It all truly ignited one Tuesday evening. I was at my parents' house, my usual role, the unpaid, unthanked family IT support. Wi-Fi's out, thermostat's broken. Call me. Nelson, 3 years younger, and a black hole of irresponsibility, was never bothered. The air was thick with a familiar tension, but tonight, it was supercharged. Mom was a blur of hushed, frantic whispers on the phone, back turned. Dad paced like a trapped animal. No greeting. Just that suffocating vibe of walking in on a meltdown you're not meant to witness. Wi-Fi again? I asked, my voice flat. Dad just grunted, basement, and went back to his frantic march. Mom remained glued to her phone. Downstairs, amidst the dust and gloom, as I wrestled with their ancient router, their voices sharp and careless, cut through the vent. What if Nelson doesn't get bail? Mom hissed. Yeah, we have to do something. Dad's reply was guttural. We'll drain everything, every last cent. Max out the cards. Not a hint of seeking alternatives, just a kamikaze dive into financial ruin. For Nelson. Always for Nelson, the golden screw-up. I'd heard this song before, his bad luck a constant refrain, my parents the ever-ready cleanup crew, but their entire life savings? This was a new, horrifying crescendo. I fixed the Wi-Fi, of course. Heading upstairs, Dad stopped me. No thanks. Just, can you help transfer money from that old joint account? Now. No explanation. I wasn't an idiot. You sure you want to do that? I asked, a bitter tang in my mouth. He glared as if I were the fool. Mom then appeared, phone call ended, face etched with a desperate resolve. Give us a minute, dear, she said, a clear dismissal. I walked out of that house. Their dismissive, give us a minute, echoing in my ears. A bitter counterpoint to the frantic, hushed tones I'd overheard about saving Nelson. The yard, a patchwork of overgrown weeds and forgotten childhood projects, felt like a metaphor for my place in their lives. Present, functional when needed, but largely ignored. I scrolled through Reddit, the mindless stream of internet arguments, a welcome distraction from the storm brewing in my chest. The muffled sounds of their argument, no doubt about the logistics of Nelson's latest rescue mission, eventually died down. Dad emerged, his face set in grim lines. You can go, he announced, not a question but a command. So, I left. Again, just the family problem solver, dismissed once the immediate technicality was handled. Or in this case, postponed by my refusal to be their instant ATM facilitator. This initial incident, while rankling, wouldn't have shattered me. I'd known my place for years, carved out by countless similar dismissals. I was the reliable one, the one who didn't cause trouble, the one who fixed things. But then, about a week later, life threw me a curveball that no amount of router resetting skills could fix. I found out I needed surgery. Nothing life-threatening, not immediately, but serious enough that ignoring it, as I'd been foolishly doing to avoid the morass of insurance and bills, was no longer an option. The pain had become a constant, grinding companion, and if I didn't deal with it, my ability to work, to function, would be severely compromised. The thought of asking them for help was nauseating. I'd always been the giver in our twisted family dynamic, the one who quietly patched up the holes Nelson and their enabling parenting inevitably created. But the medical bills were looming, a terrifying mountain of debt I couldn't scale alone, not with the recovery time involved. So, swallowing my pride, my resentment, and a healthy dose of self-loathing, I called my dad. I kept it brief, factual, explained the situation, the necessity of the surgery, and asked if they could possibly help with a loan. Not a handout, I emphasized, a loan I would repay. The silence on the other end of the line stretched, taut and suffocating. Then his voice, devoid of any warmth, any concern, sliced through the quiet. "If one of you has to go," he stated, his tone as cold and final as a tombstone, "it's better you than him." Just like that. No preamble, no apology, no feigned regret. Just the brutal, unvarnished truth of my worth in their eyes. In the background, I heard my mother's voice, clear and unwavering, not even a whisper of hesitation. "Nelson's always been our priority. You're on your own, dear." Dear. The casual cruelty of that single word was like a fist to the gut. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. A strange, icy calm descended. The years of subtle slights, of being the second choice, the afterthought, coalesced into this one crystalline moment of hideous clarity. "Thanks," I managed, my voice surprisingly steady. "Thanks for showing me where I stand." Then I hung up before he could. I stared at my phone, the black screen reflecting my own stunned, pale face. Nelson. He was probably off somewhere, blissfully unaware, or more likely, callously indifferent, already plotting his next escape from responsibility, confident that his safety net would always be there. The worst part? It wasn't a surprise. Not really. It was the verbal confirmation of a lifetime of lived experience. I was the backup plan, the fixer of broken things, the low-maintenance child who got a $20 gift card for Christmas, while Nelson unwrapped the latest iPhone. Hearing them say it so plainly, so devoid of any pretense of parental affection, didn't break me. It liberated something. Something snapped, not with a crack, but with the clean, decisive severing of a corroded chain. What do you do with that kind of knowledge? That raw, unadulterated confirmation of your utter expendability to the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally? I texted my friend Evelyn, a vague, watered-down version of events, needing to vent but terrified of sounding as pathetic as I felt. She, of course, tried to rationalize. Maybe they're just stressed, you know? Maybe Nelson's in really deep trouble this time. I understood her perspective, but the platitudes felt hollow. You can't just discard one child because the other is a professional life ruiner. I didn't even tell her what my father had actually said. The words felt too monstrous to repeat, too unbelievable. I didn't want her pity, or worse, her disbelief. Sleep that night was a cruel joke. My mind replayed every sacrifice, every instance I'd dropped everything to rush to their aid, every time I'd lent them cash that Nelson had borrowed and conveniently forgotten to repay. Each memory was a fresh twist of the knife, sharpened by my father's blunt pronouncement, "Family takes care of its own." A mantra that, in practice, had always exclusively meant Nelson, never me. It wasn't even primarily about the money for the surgery, not anymore. It was the profound, soul-crushing realization that after a lifetime of striving, of hoping that one day they might finally see me, they had flatly, unequivocally told me it was never going to happen. I was, and always would be, their disposable child. The next morning, as if to underscore their breathtaking callousness, a text pinged from my mom. No apology. No acknowledgement of the previous night's devastating conversation. Just a casual, infuriatingly normal request. "Can you pick up groceries on your way home from work today, sweetie? We're out of milk and bread." Sweetie. The audacity of it stole my breath. I stared at the message, a hysterical laugh bubbling in my throat. Were they insane? Or did they genuinely believe I was so utterly conditioned, so thoroughly beaten down, that I'd just trot off to the store like a good little automaton after they'd essentially told me my life was less valuable than my brother's? I didn't even bother to reply. The phone felt contaminated in my hand. I spent the day walking around in a daze, a thick fog of anger and disbelief clouding my senses. Was I being overly dramatic? Was Evelyn right? But then, my father's voice would echo in my memory. "If one of you has to go, it's better you than him," delivered with such chilling, matter-of-fact finality. No hesitation, no flicker of remorse. Just the cold, hard calculus of my expendability. I wasn't being dramatic. I was finally seeing the unvarnished, ugly truth. I was spare parts. Later that day, as if orchestrated by some cosmic puppet master of familial dysfunction, Nelson called. The first time I'd heard his voice in months. He sounded tired, bored, like he just rolled out of bed at noon. "Hey," he drawled, "you talked to Mom and Dad?" I confirmed that I had. He sighed, a gust of put-upon martyrdom. "Yeah, they're pretty stressed. Can you, help out with some stuff? Smooth things over?" The sheer, unadulterated entitlement in his tone was almost comical. I actually laughed, a short, sharp bark of pure derision, and then I hung up. He immediately texted, "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I stared at the words, a cold fury hardening within me. Harder for whom, Nelson? For you? For the parents who'd always prioritized your screw-ups over my survival? I blocked his number without a second thought. What did he even want? He'd always been like this, expecting me to be the eternal caretaker, the cleaner of his messes, the keeper of parental sanity, so he could continue his reign of error unchecked. The calls from my parents started piling up. I'd see their names flash on my screen, and a perverse part of me would flicker with a dying ember of hope. Maybe this time, an apology. Maybe this time, they'd realize the enormity of what they'd said. But it was never that. It was always, "Can you help us with this bill?" Or, "Nelson needs you to transfer that money," or, "The internet is out again. When can you come?" Never, "Are you okay?" Never, "Do you need anything?" Just an endless litany of chores and demands, as if I were nothing more than a particularly versatile household appliance. The old anger, the familiar ache of being unseen, began to morph into something colder, harder, a resolve. If I was just a tool to them, a means to an end, then perhaps it was time they learned that tools could be put down. Perhaps they didn't get to use me anymore. I started pulling back, slowly at first, then with increasing decisiveness. Texts went unanswered. Calls went straight to voicemail. Requests for my time, my skills, my money were met with a wall of silence. Nelson tried again, leaving a typically self-absorbed voicemail. "You're making things hard on everyone. Stop acting like such a child." I deleted it, a ghost of a smile playing on my lips. Guilt? No. Just a profound, bone-deep weariness and a dawning, dangerous sense of liberation. It's a strange thing to deconstruct the myth of family you've clung to your whole life. You grow up believing family is family, an unbreakable bond. Then you realize with a brutal clarity that for some, family is just a hierarchy of favoritism, and you were never meant to climb it. I wasn't sure if this was normal or if I'd just drawn the losing ticket in the familial lottery. But one thing was crystal clear: I was done pretending. And as this realization solidified, another more potent thought began to take root. They had tied so much of their lives to me, not out of love, but convenience. Bills in my name for better credit. Accounts I managed because they couldn't be bothered, even their phone plan. They'd built their comfort on my compliance. And I was just beginning to understand the power that lay in simply stopping. The eerie quiet from my end began to fray their nerves. That much was obvious. It started subtly. My father, who usually only texted terse commands for errands, actually called me on a Sunday morning. A seismic event in itself. He didn't inquire about my surgery, my health, or my general existence. Oh no, it was, "The online banking thing is locked again. Some security notification popped up, and your mother's panicking. Nelson's busy. Can you come now? It's important." The sheer unadulterated nerve of it. After his previous pronouncement, he still expected me to leap to attention. "Nah," I said, a newfound iciness lacing my tone that surprised even me. "I'm not around today. Figure it out." The silence on his end was heavy with indignation before he stiffly replied, "Guess I'll have to," and hung up. That was just the opening salvo. My mother then launched her offensive via text. The casual grocery requests morphed into guilt-drenched novels, epic sagas of their suffering due to Nelson's ongoing situation, details of which remained conveniently vague, as always. She painted vivid pictures of their stress, their sleepless nights, liberally peppering her narratives with phrases like, "Family has to stick together," and, "After all we've done for you." I left her unread, each unread message a small, satisfying act of defiance. It was astonishing, really, how quickly their tone shifted from imperious annoyance to a cloying, desperate sort of pleading when their primary convenience machine, me, stopped functioning. The calls escalated, 2, 3, sometimes 5 times a day. Voicemails filled with frantic questions about bills they suddenly couldn't understand, insurance policies whose details were now arcane mysteries, passwords I'd set up for them years ago because Nelson wasn't good with that stuff, and they simply assumed I'd be their eternal digital custodian. You don't realize the sheer volume of invisible labor you perform until you just stop. Suddenly, my mother was blowing up my phone because her Netflix had logged her out. And how dare it? She'd text in a panic, "What happened to the grocery delivery app? I can't log into my tablet. Did you change something?" The implication was always that I was somehow responsible for these new inconveniences. I pictured her, lost in a sea of error messages, jabbing at screens with impotent fury, and a cold, hard satisfaction settled in my gut. I didn't reply. Not out of spite, not entirely, but because a crucial circuit had finally blown within me. If I wasn't important enough for basic human decency, then they could damn well learn to Google their own tech problems. Nelson, naturally, remained a ghost in this unfolding drama, a master of the disappearing act whenever the spotlight wasn't shining directly on his needs or glorifying his alleged potential. That had always been his special talent. Then, about 2 weeks after the phone call that had irrevocably changed everything, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Nelson, his voice oozing that familiar blend of forced casualness and underlying irritation, clearly using someone else's phone to bypass my block. "You're making things way harder on everyone, you know," he began. No preamble. "Mom and Dad are completely freaking out. Just help them already. Get over yourself." He tried to sound cool, unbothered, but the annoyance in his voice was palpable. This was clearly an unwelcome interruption to his otherwise responsibility-free existence. "You're the golden boy, Nelson," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "The priority. You help them." He actually had the audacity to laugh, a harsh, grating sound. "Seriously? I don't have time for this crap. It's your job because you know how all their ancient stuff works. Stop being such a martyr." I just hung up, a fresh wave of disgust washing over me. The climax of this particular act in their tragic comedy of entitlement came when my dad showed up at my apartment. Unannounced, uninvited. He'd never done that before. Not once in all the years I'd lived on my own. He pounded on the door with a ferocity that rattled the cheap frame, his shadow looming large through the peephole. I opened it a crack, just enough to see his face, contorted with that familiar expression of impending lecture. "You're being utterly childish," he snarled, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "Get over yourself and help your family. This has gone on long enough." I met his gaze, my own surprisingly steady. "You told me very clearly that I'm not your priority," I replied, my voice dangerously quiet. "So, figure it out with Nelson. He's the one who matters, remember?" He actually tried to shove the door open then, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes that I would dare to physically resist him. I held it firm, my adrenaline surging. "Leave," I said, the word a shard of ice. He slapped the doorframe in frustration, a sharp, cracking sound, then spun on his heel, muttering curses under his breath as he stomped away. My neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, poked her head out, her eyes wide with curiosity. I just offered a tight shrug and closed my door, the click of the lock sounding like a declaration of independence. It was, I had to admit, astonishingly freeing. The decision to untangle myself financially was like systematically pulling bricks from a crumbling wall. I knew the whole rotten structure was about to come crashing down, and it did, spectacularly. The first tremor was my mother's frantic call about the water bill. "It's all switched around," she wailed, her voice shrill with panic. "I can't log in. The password isn't working. What did you do?" There was no request for help, just an accusation. "Call customer service, Mom," I said, my voice a chilling echo of the detachment she'd shown me. "They're paid to help with these things." Her sputtering rage before she slammed the phone down was almost satisfying. An hour later, predictably, Nelson called, his tone a cocktail of annoyance and disbelief. "Seriously? You're just going to let them drown? Just fix the damn water bill. You always handled this stuff." His audacity was a monument to their collective delusion. "No, Nelson," I replied, the words like chips of ice. "You're the priority, remember? You fix it. I'm done being the family pack mule," he swore, a string of pathetic, impotent curses, before hanging up. Good. Let him feel a fraction of the pressure they'd so casually heaped on me for years. The dominoes began to fall faster. My parents, realizing their usual channels of manipulation were failing, started outsourcing their harassment. My friend Evelyn texted, her messages laced with a weary sympathy I no longer wanted. "Your mom's calling me non-stop. She sounds genuinely distressed. Are you sure you don't want to just talk to her?" I told Evelyn flatly that they knew exactly what they'd done, and if she was uncomfortable, she should block their numbers. The calls to Evelyn stopped. Then came the letters from the bank, official and impersonal, notifying them of joint accounts being closed, credit lines severed. I ignored the furious, rambling voicemails that followed. My mother's next tactic was a tear-soaked call, her voice cracking as she described their inability to pay some critical bills, the shame of facing overdue notices. "We don't know what to do," she sobbed. "Nelson, he's not helping." "Maybe you could just ask him to help," I suggested, the sarcasm probably lost on her in her manufactured distress. She just wept louder and hung up. I felt nothing, not pride, not guilt, just a vast, echoing emptiness where my filial duty used to reside. Then came the family group chat meltdown, a truly operatic performance. My father, a man whose emotional range usually spanned from stoic disapproval to simmering resentment, unleashed a torrent of furious text messages, lengthy, self-pitying tirades about loyalty, about the sacrifices he'd made, conveniently omitting how those sacrifices always benefited Nelson at my expense, about how Nelson needed them, and how my selfish, childish rebellion was destroying everything. Nelson, ever the dutiful echo, chimed in with his own brand of venom, accusing me of being always jealous, of actively trying to ruin things for him, of being a vindictive shrew. The sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy was breathtaking. I didn't engage. I simply read their bile, a cold knot tightening in my stomach, and then, with a decisive tap, I left the group. The digital silence that followed was deafeningly sweet. My Aunt Helen, Dad's sister, who usually kept a very wide berth from their family circus, texted me later, a tentative, "Is everything all right, dear? Your father seems upset." I didn't reply to her either. This wasn't her battle, and I wasn't about to be triangulated back into their toxic orbit. The final, most desperate act in this pathetic drama unfolded a few days later. I was trying to enjoy a rare, quiet evening, a fragile peace settling over my small apartment, when the banging started on my door. Not a knock, but a furious, insistent pounding that vibrated through the floorboards. I knew, even before I looked through the peephole, that it was her. My mother stood there, her face a twisted mask of rage and desperation, her hair disheveled. She looked like a woman on the verge of complete collapse. The moment I opened the door a fraction, she tried to barge in, shoving her way past me. "You can't do this to us," she shrieked, her voice raw and cracking. "You don't understand what it's like. Nelson needs us. He's always needed more. He's sensitive." I stood my ground, blocking her entry, my body a sudden unyielding wall. "And I needed you once," I said, my voice low, but carrying a dangerous undercurrent of all the years of suppressed pain. "Just once. And you told me to get lost. You said, 'If one has to go, it's better you than him.' Remember that, Mom? Or has Nelson's latest crisis conveniently erased that from your memory too?" Her face contorted. For a fleeting second, I saw something akin to shock, maybe even a flicker of shame in her eyes, but it was quickly consumed by a fresh wave of fury. "You were always the strong one," she screamed, her voice echoing in the narrow hallway, no doubt providing ample entertainment for Mrs. Henderson across the hall, who I could see peeking through her blinds. "You could handle it. Nelson couldn't. It's not the same." "You're right," I said, the calmness in my voice terrifying even to myself. "It's not the same, because I'm not him. And I'm not your punching bag, your ATM, or your emotional support animal anymore." She lunged then, not to get past me, but at me, her hand connecting with my arm in a clumsy, stinging slap. It was more pathetic than painful. I didn't flinch. I just looked at her, at this woman who had birthed me, and then systematically erased me, and felt nothing but a profound, desolate pity. "You made your choice, Mom," I said, my voice devoid of any inflection. "Years ago. And then you confirmed it on that phone call. Now, you need to live with it. He's your priority. So go prioritize him." I slowly, deliberately began to close the door in her face, her continued shrieks and accusations turning into muffled, impotent rage as the cheap wood sealed her out. The silence that descended in my apartment afterwards wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of a battlefield after the bombs have stopped falling, thick with the scent of smoke and devastation, but also, finally, with the promise of an end. The door clicked shut, sealing out her shrill accusations, and the silence that engulfed my apartment was heavy, ringing. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was the quiet of a battlefield after the last shot is fired. I slid down against the door, the wood cool against my back, and finally let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. The storm had passed through me, and I was still standing. 4 months have passed since that day. I got the surgery, paid for it myself with a loan I'll eventually clear. I'm working, healing, building a life on my own terms. The calls and texts from them haven't stopped. They're a daily pathetic litany of desperation. My dad's terse, accusatory texts, "Hope you're proud of yourself," eventually gave way to a single, emailed apology, a pathetic, "We screwed up. We need you. Please talk to your mom." I archived it, unread. My mother's tearful voicemails, her pleas of just one conversation, still arrive with the morning light, like clockwork. I heard through my cousin their house is in trouble, utilities cut, Nelson is a ghost, couch surfing his way through life as usual. Sometimes I answer their calls, listen to their frantic circular arguments for a moment, then hang up without a word. Other times, I just let it ring, the sound a distant, irrelevant noise. They spent my whole life making it brutally clear where I stood. Now, they're finally experiencing the full weight of their choice. They wanted Nelson to be their everything. Well, now he is. If they're looking for a hero, a savior, a backup plan, they can call him. As for me, I'm out.